Good afternoon. I'm Merrick Masters, a professor of business emeritus, commentator, columnist, and podcaster. This is Labor News at Work. Today is June the 27th, 2024. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel at Merrick Masters. The topics we'll cover today are contract negotiations, including those between the machinists in Boeing and the flight attendants in American Airlines. We'll also talk about unionizing workers at Amazon, Starbucks, and Mercedes. We'll discuss the situation with regard to the level of strike activity, major strikes in the United States through the month of May of this year. Focus a little bit on Generation Z at work and talk to people in that age group that they have options when it comes to deciding how they want their work to be going ahead, and one of which is the option of having a union represent them. And then we'll talk about UAW leadership under investigation by the court-appointed monitor. In the realm of contract negotiations, Boeing and the International Association of Machinists are undergoing contract talks now. The contract will expire on September the 12th, 2024. There are 32,000 workers affected by this. The workers are requesting a 40% increase. They've been operating under a 10-year contract, and they have not had a new contract for 15 years. The flight attendants are also negotiating with American Airlines. There are 28,000 flight attendants covered, and they are trying to get their first raise in 5 years. The flight attendants negotiations with American Airlines are covered by a different law from the Boeing and machinists contract negotiations. In the case of the flight attendants, they're covered by the Railway Labor Act, which has a different set of procedures for resolving disputes. You can see by the flow chart here from the National Mediation Board established under the Railway Labor Act, the procedures that they follow in order to grant the parties at some stage the right to strike are to engage in what they refer to as self-help. The law provides for the National Mediation Board to become involved and provide for mediation services to help resolve the dispute short of a contract strike, or to submit the disagreement to arbitration, final arbitration, if the parties are willing to do so. There's a cooling off period provided if the parties do go to mediation and are unable to reach an agreement before they can go out on strike, although the president does have the option of intervening in this case to try and resolve the dispute. Contract negotiations. There's been a lot of reporting done on the effort on the part of workers at Starbucks to form unions. They have won elections at 450 sites in the United States over the past several months, but yet they have not been able to secure a single contract. And they are negotiating, the union representatives, with these workers at various sites with Starbucks to establish a procedure and a contract template which can be applied with appropriate modification to the various locals that would be represented under the recognition granted at these sites. This is a very important step because unions, in order to really demonstrate their true value, have to be able to negotiate first contracts, and this is a difficult road to hoe, particularly for new bargaining sites that lack a major union or that don't have a lot of wherewithal within their own facilities and their own local arrangements to provide for effective contract negotiations. At Amazon, the Amazon Labor Union, which achieved a major victory in a warehouse site in Staten Island a couple of years ago, has undergone a lot of internal discord. It's been rattled with disagreement about the lack of progress in getting a first contract. And this independent union agreed recently and voted to affiliate with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, which has also had its sights on Amazon, that should enable it to have more wherewithal, better resources to marshal that they can bring to bear to try and negotiate a first contract. There are also elections that are going to take place for new local union officers at the Amazon Labor Union, which is affiliated now, as I said, with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Starbucks, as I mentioned, has been negotiating with the union that represents workers there to come up with a template, a basic boilerplate contract they can apply across the various sites that have achieved recognition. As I mentioned earlier, there have been 450 sites in which workers have voted for union representation, but none of them at this point has been able to secure their first contract. United Auto Workers has had a difficult time in organizing the non-union companies in the industry, particularly those that are foreign-based, as well as the more recent ones that are EV producers operated domestically, such as Tesla and Rivian and Lucid. The UAW did score a victory recently, very recently, in an election held at Volkswagen, which represented the first success they've had at that particular site over several years in trying to get it organized. They, after that particular election victory, were able to secure an election at Mercedes-Benz, but they were unable to win that election. And this particular chart shows you the difficulty that they've had in organizing in the South. They've had very few successes in the South in the auto industry, and they have a steep climb to go in order to correct that situation. Major strike activity. There are only a handful of strikes that have occurred in this year, 2024. And in the month of May, at the beginning of the month, there were only 21,200 workers out of a workforce of about 150 million people that were out on strike. Major strikes are those that involve workers in 1,000 or more size bargaining units. In May, 3 of the major strikes that are going on involve the United Auto Workers, but the auto workers are not representing auto workers, they're representing government employees at universities. One is the University of Washington, the other is the University of California system, and then Western Washington University. Generation Z workers have gotten a lot of attention recently in the news about their work habits, their work ethic, their work-life balance preferences. Some of the headlines are unflattering, such as Generation Z workers are unprofessional and employers don't want them, or Generation Z started quiet quitting and now they're taking it even a step further with quiet vacationing. I think it's a mistake to paint the generation with a broad brush, just like it's a mistake to paint the boomer generation with a broad brush. I think that those workers in Generation Z want what everybody has had, respect and an opportunity at the workplace and to be treated fairly and with dignity. I would give some advice to the Generation Zers who don't like their work situations, whether that be their employers, their bosses, the compensation that they are granted, the working conditions more generally. And that advice is to do something about it. Obviously, they can exercise their exit voice and leave the workplace and try and find a job someplace else. But another option for them to consider is union representation. Having a union is one way to gain leverage with employers to affect how management behaves and how your working conditions are determined. I don't want to minimize the difficulties in achieving union representation. You typically have to get an election of a union to be approved by the members of a prospective bargaining unit by a majority vote of those casting ballots in the unit. And that imposes risks on both sides, both the employer side and the worker side. And people have to balance those risks against the potential benefits of having a union. But it is an option to consider. And if workers are willing to consider this, they can go to any number of different unions, which typically represent workers in different sectors and occupations, and find one in particular that may fit their needs, reach out to them, shop around for a union that can effectively represent them, try and organize them, and get them their first contract. It's important to do your due diligence in this regard, and with information technology today, you can get a lot of information, both formally and informally, about these unions and how they work in behalf of workers. The last topic for discussion, the United Auto Workers, which has launched a major campaign to organize more than a dozen non-union auto companies in the United States, in which it did secure a victory recently, as I noted, at Volkswagen, and at the same time suffered a defeat in trying to organize a site at Mercedes-Benz in Alabama. It's under a court-appointed monitor as a result of a scandal it was in, and the monitor issued a ninth status report on June the 10th, in which he announced that investigations are ongoing, one of which involves the president. Charges have been made by the Secretary Treasurer and International Vice President that they were retaliated against for actions that they took or wouldn't take. There's another investigation involved alleged financial misconduct against a regional director who's unnamed, a regional director of the union. The International Vice President and the Secretary Treasurer, along with the International President and the Regional Director, are all part of its International Executive Board, which was recently elected under new procedures, direct election procedures, that were approved by the court monitor. The union is also being investigated by the monitor for allegedly dilatory responses to requests for data to conduct investigations against the charges made against the president and against this unnamed regional director. This has important implications, I think, for the union as it goes forward in trying to organize non-union auto workers. And it's important that we reserve judgment until all the facts have been gathered and the monitor issues a report before making any conclusions about whether the charges that have been leveled have merit. But clearly, it's something that the UAW wants to get behind it, and the sooner that this report can come out and it can deal with the findings in an appropriate manner, the better off it will be from a public relations standpoint. A little bit about myself. I'm a professor of business emeritus. I've been associated with business school faculties of Wayne State, the University of Pittsburgh, Texas A&M. I got my PhD from the University of Illinois in Labor and Industrial Relations. I've held numerous administrative positions, including Director of Labor at Wayne State, which included the Doug Fraser Center for Workplace Issues, with Doug Fraser being a former president of the United Auto Workers. I've written several books and numerous articles on unions, labor management relations, business and labor and politics, conflict resolution, and negotiations. As I said at the outset, I'm a commentator, columnist, and a podcaster. I'm also a former Democratic Congress for the United States. In Pennsylvania, and that was in 1992. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel, Merrick Masters at Merrick Masters. Thank you for watching this episode, and stay tuned for, in the very near future, another edition of Labor News at Work. Thank you and have a good day.